So you're going to...
Say something up there. Testing 1, 2, 3.
Testing 1, 2, 3. That's okay. So where's Jason? Let's get this ball rolling.
Jason's snoozing.
I wish I could have just recorded it and then hit the tape and leave. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we'd like to welcome
Yeah.
Good morning to all.
Oh, Christ.
Hallelujah, Christ is risen.
Lord is risen indeed. Hallelujah.
That was not together or loud enough. Hallelujah, Christ is risen.
The Lord is risen indeed. Hallelujah.
Much better, much better. So let's jump right in by way of reminder to, especially notice to folks who have not perhaps been here for an Easter People presentation. This tradition was begun in 1992 by Nancy Lovely when she was the Director of Formation and Community Life here at Holy Comforter. And we have done it every year since, so this is the 28th year actually of Easter People. Some years 1 people, most years 2, occasionally 3. Today we have a powerhouse presenter, Dick Morley. And I'm not going to take up any more of Dick's time. I'm just going to introduce him and say welcome and thank you for doing this. So Dick, come on. I'll check the volume.
Yep. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? All right, I'm not doing this, so I'm leaving.
Shut the door.
Okay, I'm going to read much of this just because this is not my kind of bailiwick. Hopefully the visuals will take you away from me. Some of you may be wondering why I was asked to be an Easter person. And I can assure you I've been wondering that myself. Previous Easter persons spoke about getting called. They talked about how they got a call from Nancy Lovely, or more recently from Penny Kezios. Penny Kezios actually contacted me one time, but I had just had too many things going on. And she was really nice to let me kind of pass on it. But now they're getting sneaky. On my first day of spring break, March 25th, around 12:30, MJ and I had just finished shopping and we were on our way home when an incoming call appeared on my car screen asking me, would I accept a call from Jason? I accepted it, and he initially talked about the reunion he had with his brothers in Arizona and watching the Cubs play. But I had this strange feeling he was going to be the bearer of bad news. And it turned out to be true, because he asked me to do this. So heed this warning. If you get a call weeks before Easter from Jason, and you have the option to accept or ignore the call, I would give it some serious consideration before answering.
Changing my phone number.
So, in preparation for this talk, my thoughts started to be bombarded all over this past month. And one interesting thought was how God and I may have something in common. This got your attention, I can tell. I think maybe God and I are introvert, intuitive, thinking, and judging. I mean, who spends more time in solitude than God? No one has seen him face to face since day one. And he knows when day one was because he created it. And even when he has spoken, it is only to relatively select few. And when it comes to intuitive and thinking and judging, he's like the Ford F-150 truck. He's not only raised the bar, he is the bar. So I think it's time to maybe kind of revert to more traditional approach to this talk and start with my family. This was taken in 1965 in our house in Kenilworth. My dad was an obstetrician gynecologist at Evanston Hospital. He was a dedicated professional, deeply passionate about his care of patients, which I and him had something in common when working with students at the high school. He loved convertibles, and he loved learning. That's one thing we didn't necessarily have in common. He believed in hard work and play hard. And I remember one time when I was a studio cameraman between the summer of my junior year and senior year, and I was working for an ABC affiliate, and I was trying to save money to go visit Mary Jane. We were dating at the time, my junior and senior year. And I worked like 30 days in a row because I had to save all this money. So I thought I was pretty proud of myself, 30 days in a row. So I called Dad and kind of boasted, hey, I just worked 30 days in a row. And he says, well, try 19 months. And I said, 19 months? He says, yeah. I said, you win. I said, there's no way I would do that. My mom, in my humble opinion, was the Bo Derek of moms. She was a 10. She loved me unconditionally. And she was the first one I would go to if you thought you were in trouble, which was rare for me, because I was the youngest of 4, and I knew all the potholes. And she was someone that you just expect. She loved it when you came and see her. She was saddened when you left. And I remember after my first semester, my freshman year in college, I told her I would be coming home on a certain day, but I wanted to surprise her and come in a couple of days early. She hadn't seen me all semester. I was in Thanksgiving with my brother in Arizona, and so when I hit the doorbell, she comes to the door and she goes, Dick, and just gives me this huge hug. And I'm thinking, during this time where the sudden loss of oxygen, I'm thinking, I'm not doing this again. This is dangerous. My sister's the oldest, very smart, Northwestern grad, worked for the Harris Bank before she got married and had a couple of kids. She quite opinionated, very talented, terrific. My closest other brother to me was Bill. He's the one standing behind my mom. He was the guy who was only 18 months older than I was, and you'd think it was 5 years or more. I mean, he wouldn't let me do anything. I remember one time we were down in Florida, and we both had driver's license. He would never let me drive. I'm going, what is this? You're only 18 months older than me. Why can't you? But that, that was kind of Bill. But the one I was really closest to was Tom. He was a great guy, great sense of humor. We were very close. When I was in high school, he came home from college, and he was telling me stories about his kind of Animal House-like fraternity brothers, more focused on the SWOTA Prince. Now, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to tell you what that acronym stands for, because this is a place of worship. But he had stories that were going so much, he had me laughing so hard, I begged him to stop. But the jerk kept going. But he was a great guy. We didn't always get along as a family, but when times of crisis, we were there for each other. Family was really important to my parents. Holidays, I had great aunts and uncles, cousins, and we still keep in contact. We see each other. We do reunions. I was really lucky. Just to give you an idea, I was born in Columbus, Ohio, and 9 months later, we moved to Evanston. Dad started his practice at Evanston Hospital. We then moved to Evanston on Michigan Avenue, a couple of houses south of Michigan Shores Club. And that's the first memory I have. And then my dad decided they wanted to move to Kenilworth, and we moved to 51 Kenilworth Avenue, a couple of houses from the lake. It's a Spanish stucco house just north. And they weren't going to close on the house until October, but they had arranged for me to attend junior kindergarten at Sears. And I was the morning kindergarten, and my mom would take me to school and then pick me up. Well, one day, I go out there, there's no mom. Now, I'm going, I got lunch engagements, I got, nap afterwards, I got playtime, I'm on a schedule, let's get this going. So I decided to exit into the wilderness. I'm not going to read that part. So I decided to leave. So I went across Townley Field, and this is what I looked like back then. And across Townley Field, hey, we don't have time for all this. Yeah, across Townley Field, crossed Kenilworth Avenue, walked along the train tracks, went to Lake Street, turned left, walked across 10th Street, all the way down to Sheridan Road, crossed Sheridan Road, first block, turn right to come to my house. I get in the house thinking, hey, 4, not bad, homing pigeon, kind of like. I go in, I go, hey, Mom, I'm home. Dick, where have you been? Cops were everywhere. They couldn't, And I'm thinking, what's the big deal? Well, you ever heard the old saying, what goes around comes around? I took my 4-year-old daughter, remember the age, 4-year-old daughter, to a Northwestern game playing the University of Washington. This is Kathy, okay? And we sat down on the east stand. The sun's out. It's a beautiful day. Northwestern lost 34-0, just so you know. And we met this couple right next to us who were from Washington. Great. They were really sweet. Kathy was playing them, having a great time, yada, yada, yada. And I'm going, so I said, are you hungry? Do you want me to get you something? She said, sure. So I go down, and then I'm in the standing line. I'm about to order food and all this stuff. And I've just realized I just left my daughter with people I hardly even know. And I'm going, holy smokes. So I get the food, I go up the gate, I look up, no daughter, no couple. And I'm thinking, whoa. I checked and I think, well, maybe I'm at the wrong gate. Went up the next one, there's Kathy playing with the couple. I'm going, I know what Mom was thinking about. Okay. So I'm now, from junior kindergarten, I went on and obviously stayed at Sears, okay? I was involved in a lot of sports activities. I played baseball, I played basketball. I was on the Kenilworth Rebels football team and spent summers swimming at the Kenilworth Beach. As I said earlier, I wasn't really into learning. And I remember my 8th grade year, we used to analyze a book, and we spent like 6 weeks on it, going through, character growth and plot development, inferences, and this and that. And I'm going, okay. So, and then you would have to take a final, and it was it was huge. It was in regards to your grade. So we had the final. I was walking down the hall, and my teacher, Mrs. Lowe, said, hey, Dick, come on in. So I go in, and I sat down. She says, hey, you got to be on the final. I go, great. And then she asked me, Dick, did you read this book? And I said, no. And then she goes, well, Dick, look how much better you could have done if you read the book. And I said, look how great I did without reading it. During this time, when I was at Sears, obviously a lot of things were happening worldwide. The Kennedy assassination, the funeral. I was glued to the tube. I saw the live shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald in the parking garage of the Dallas Police Headquarters, the stabbing of Valerie Percy, whose house was maybe a couple of hundred yards from where I was, and her sister Gail was in my class at Sears. I also was confirmed here. But I also had a really good friend who I met, Joe, my Snuffy. We knew each other since 3rd grade. We were kind of an odd couple outwardly. It would appear that we had nothing in common. In general, he was more the academic type. I was obviously more the athletic type. We were 22 seconds apart. in the sense of distance from one house, my house on his was on Sheridan. And the reason was 22 seconds because I ran, not him. He was a goofy runner. He just wasn't great at it. His parents were practically my second parents, Nelson and Mary Jane Stoker. Connection? Mary Jane. Okay, all right. I guess I was the only one that thought that was interesting. We just had a great time together. I call him up, and I said, "Are you doing anything?" He said, "No, I'm doing nothing." He said, "Well, I'm not doing anything either. Might as well do nothing together." So, and when we got older, we did some kind of crazy things. My dad had a 68 GTO convertible. I mean, this thing was really fast. And they were down in Florida, and I said, "Hey, Joe, let's go test this thing out, and let's see how fast this thing goes." So we went on the turnpike on the spur. I'm going 120, and I'm blowing a car like it was standing still. So just to make sure I could still do it, we did it on the way back. We also did something I thought was really unique. We went down the ravines without using the brake. And I was driving my sister's car, and I hit this kind of hole, and the hubcap started falling off, and it was running along parallel to me, and I'm going, whoa, look at that. But I didn't want to stop because that would ruin the test. We passed the test, came back, and picked it up. After college, we hadn't spoken in a couple of years, and I called him because I had something to tell him, and he said he had something to tell me. I was intrigued. So I said, "You first." He says, "Well, Dick, I want you to be my best man in my wedding on August 14th. And I said, "Well, I can't do that." He says, "Why not?" I said, "I'm getting married that day." I was calling him to ask him to be in my wedding. So obviously we worked things out because he got to mine and I went to his. So after Sears, after graduation, I went to New Trier. We were the Indians back then. And I was involved in a lot of school activities. I was on the varsity swimming team, football teams. I was on the New Trier Guard. I was elected treasurer of Tri-Ship. And I was also president of the Acolytes at Holy Comforter. I did all the training. I did all the scheduling. I did all that stuff. I was not a bad dresser back then, right? When I was in high school, there were a couple of teachers who really kind of impressed me, who made a big impression on me. One was Mr. Bearfield, my math teacher who I had the summer before my 9th grade year. Once you graduate from 8th grade, a lot of kids went on to summer school to get kind of acclimated. He was an African-American gentleman who really was a classy guy. He soft-spoken. He was a gentleman plus a gentleman. He really impressed me and really has affected how I look at things, and that we're not all alike, and that we're all unique. The other guy was Mr. Gahala. He was my Spanish teacher. I took him my second year because I was scared to take a language. I thought, this is going to be brutal. And knowing my name was Richard Morley, he called me Rigger for rigor mortis. I mean, because he thought I'd be dead to the language if I ever traveled to Mexico. But the other one also was Father Larry Hanworth. He brought a voice and a response and a connection to religion for me. He and Vicki were terrific. There are also many events that have been going on during this time, the 68, when Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, the riots in Detroit, the riots at the National Convention in Chicago, the daily coverage of the Vietnam War, and the shootings at Kent State. From a real spirituality perspective of It's a Wonderful Life, here I'm witnessing two different worlds at the same time. I'm living in the comfort and safety of this ideal Norman Rockwell American dream of Bedford Falls, meaning Kenilworth, and I'm watching the stark and dark contrast of reality that depicts Pottersville. So it was an interesting time about high school. I went on to the University of New Mexico, which I commonly say, thank you. during that summer before I entered, my draft number was up. You know, I didn't know, but I planned for it in pre-registration. And I was the first year they didn't allow college to firm it. So if I was in college, they could still pull me out. So I had to make a choice. And this is the choice I made. This could be the first documented evidence of my acute awareness and attention to detail. I was a member of the color guard. We presented colors at the football game, and I also colors down at the basketball game. Now, people look at this as my first day they could recognize my analness, but I think that's kind of a rude way of looking at it. So, this was pre-Mary Jane. Next year, I met Mary Jane, but we never dated until second semester because first semester she was dating my roommate. And she was trying to set me up with her roommate. Well, neither one of those worked out. So second semester, I called her out. Being, the fraternity code never calls someone else's girlfriend. So now that they were apart, I figured, okay. So I called her once, and I asked her out, and she said no. And then we talked for another hour, and we laughed and so forth. And I did this 6 more times with the same results. No, conversation, laugh, so forth. So I guess maybe the 7th time I wore her down, and she let me go out with me. Haljan, eat your heart out, buddy. Obviously, the hair is longer. This is Steve Oster. He was a guy who was a fraternity brother. The girl he's dating at the time is now his wife. He and I were in the same Navy unit together, and this was my senior year. I wasn't living in the fraternity house that year. I was in an apartment. And Steve was a great guy, really terrific guy. But I went up to him one time and I said, you seem to have changed. You don't drink anymore. You almost seem dull. And his response was, well, God is in my life. And I went, whoa. So we talked for 3 hours. He told me about the evangelical church he attends, which I later attended. It was unbelievable. I'd never seen so many people so outwardly passionate about God and so well versed in Scripture. The experience for MJ was somewhat unsettling. Her faith in God was always part of her life, which was deeply private and internal, and it's difficult for her to even express outwardly. She was concerned that I would become spiritually critical and judgmental. She even went up to a really great pastor at the Central United Methodist Church, where we later got married, but was right across the street from the university, and talked to this wonderful gentleman, Reverend Vanderpool. And he said to her, give him some time. So, after graduating, I started at the radio station. It was like the WGN of Albuquerque. I started looking for sales positions earlier before I even graduated, and fortunately, after a lengthy search, I got hired taking over a full account list, and life was good. 4 months later, we got engaged. This is one of my favorite pictures of her. We got engaged. 5 months later, we got married. And 3 weeks later, we had our first baby. You like that? See that pause? Yeah. No, we weren't. So I called Mary Jane's mom, great lady, called her up and said, hey, I want you to know you're a grandmother. She says, you're kidding. She says, yeah, Maggie May, first dog. She says, I'm not a grandmother to a dog. So a year later, when our house was robbed, the people told us that you could either get a home and security system or, get another dog. Well, that was a no-brainer. We got another dog. So I called Mary Jane's mom and said, hey, you're going to be a grandmother. She said, really? I said, yeah, we got a dog named Bunky. I said, I'm not a grandmother to a dog. So a year or so later, I found out Mary Jane was pregnant with Kathy, so I called her up and said, hey, You're going to be a grandmother. She said, you didn't buy another dog. So this is us. That's Kathy. You know, this is her family. This was around Christmas time. And, you know, Kathy was born and she was christened by Reverend Vanderpool at the Central United Methodist Church that we attended. For 4 years in my career, an opportunity came along when I was at KOB to be the sales manager of our sister station with KOB FM. I was warned not to work for this newly hired general manager who was from the corporate flagship station in Minneapolis. My thinking was my goal was to become a general manager. If I was going to do that, I would have to have, of a radio property, I would have to have sales management experience. So I figured I could handle it. In my first year, I hired 2 additional salespersons and increased our sales by 68%. Unfortunately, that was short-lived. The GM wanted to change the format. I clearly stated my concerns about target demographic and marketing positioning perspectives. He made the change anyway, and our sales revenue dropped significantly. As a result, I was out of work. I said to my wife, I apologized to her and said, you know, that, I said to myself I would never jeopardize my family again. I would try to be more diplomatic or whatever. After telling Mary Jane what had happened, she said something I would never forget. If I was married to anybody else, I'd be worried. I started looking for sales rep opportunities. I'm looking in San Francisco. Mary Jane was thinking more Dallas. Her close childhood friend, Helene, her Snuffy. And also I was thinking never coming back to Chicago. But you know, it's funny how things work out. After a long job search, I was hired at Katz Radio in June 1981. Mary and Kathy had to stay in Albuquerque until our house was sold, which took 5 months. We only saw each other only twice during that 5-month period. And when we finally moved back to the North Shore, we rented a house in Wilmette and started attending Holy Comforter, which is where I found my spiritual balance and spiritual home. Gosh, Dick. After working at Katz for about a year, I got a call from a dear friend of mine who I knew when we both worked for the same broadcast group. He was in Minneapolis and I was in Albuquerque. He said, you're not going to believe this, but the GM who fired you just got fired. When I heard that, I couldn't believe it, but I felt no joy in hearing of his firing, knowing what it's like to be out of work. My initial reaction was, how could I help him find a job or at least connections? And my friend says, are you kidding me after what he did to you? And I said, MJ and I are much better off now. I called the general sales manager of the television station, who was a dear friend of mine, and I passed on my phone number to my former boss. He made the same response. Are you kidding? My former boss never called. After 6 years at Katz, I moved on to the CBS radio network. My son Tom and daughter Ann had already come into this world, having been born at Evanston Hospital, and I had already gotten involved in teaching Sunday school. First by playing the sidekick to the late Sandy Lane, who as a co-5th grade teacher. Sandy was funny, energetic person who did more of the heavy lifting as an experienced 5th grade Sunday school teacher. And then the next year, in 1986, I was one of the lay leaders for the high school youth group. My church involvement expanded as well by becoming a member of the vestry. Life was good. We had just finished totally remodeling our house in Winnetka when I got a call asking me if I would be interested in being the sales manager in New York. It was a tremendous opportunity, but it came with many reservations. I talked to many people in the broadcasting industry, and some had said it was a career maker, but the majority regretted going, particularly with family and only staying there a short time before returning back to Chicago. I had many sleepless nights. The male side of my family felt it was an incredible opportunity. My sister thought I was being selfish and not being considerate of how this could affect my family. Mary Jane was putting on a brave face, but she never thought we would ever live in New York. But she was happy for me because she felt I was finally getting the recognition for all the hard work I've done. We went to New York, had interviews, and was given time to look at the real estate and schools in Connecticut only. I'm not living in New York. They offered me the position on a Thursday night, and I accepted it. The next morning, while still looking at houses, I could see the emotional strain this was having on Mary Jane. I said to myself, I can't do this to her, and it wasn't worth it. I got out of the car and called the New York office and spoke to the guy who hired me because I was going to be his replacement, who I knew well, and told him this is not going to work. He said, you can't resign, Dick, because my hiring had already been announced throughout all of CBS, and he told me my career would be over if I didn't take the job. The promise I made to myself of never jeopardizing my wife and my family's welfare went through my head. So I said, okay, let's do it. But I knew my fate was sealed. After we were two salespeople short, I had to do the sales, I had to hire a sales assistant, I had to do all this stuff, and learn the entire New York market and all this. I mean, it was unbelievable. I think one good thing was when I was hiring the sales assistant, when I got to the one I really liked, I went to the other administrative assistants of people higher than me and said, would you like to talk to her and interview? So, because I was concerned about chemistry, how they would get along and so forth. And they gave me their approval, and she was hired. The vice president and general administrative assistant came up to me and said, Dick, you're the first person ever asked us for our thoughts in regard to a new hire. So it just meant something to hear that. Over the 4th of July weekend when Mary Jane and the kids were visiting her mom in Hobbs, I remember standing in the pool at the home of this vice president, general manager of the network. He was a great guy, and he told me about his career at CBS, where he headed up the New York sales office for the television network, and how his job would keep him out late and every night entertaining clients during the week and as well as on weekends. He said it caused his marriage to end, and his children had been somewhat messed up by it. After hearing all this, I asked him, would he have changed anything? And he said no. And I'm thinking, no way. I knew then this was not going to work because I wasn't willing to make that kind of sacrifice. About a month or so later, as I'm thinking about leaving, they told me that I was leaving and going back to Chicago. And they were great about it. They just said, we don't want to lose you as an employee. We value you and we don't want to lose you. And in the end, they were kind and considerate in giving me the time needed to transfer. The good news is, in all this, was my family was going back home, but I felt I let them down. Because I was in New York, I missed the first trip to West Virginia, but made 11 out of the next 12. It was an incredible experience. Friends of mine were saying, you only get 2 weeks of vacation. You're spending a week in West Virginia in the smoldering heat. That's quite a sacrifice. And I just was thinking, that's not how I looked at it. It's being with a group of people from totally opposite ends of the economic spectrum and life experiences and working together as one for a common purpose, to help those in need. Some memorable events was me falling off the roof the first time. The ladders flew out from under me when I was going down, and from some miraculous reason, I fell between this kind of ramp and a huge tree trunk. I hit the ground, rolled backward, did a kind of backward somersault, and did this, like the great Wallenda. Barb thought I was dead, but fortunately I survived. Another one was when we were I'm always on roofs. Another one was we're doing this roof. We took it all off, but we couldn't make any cover on it, so the roof was exposed. We left thinking we would be okay. We get to the church, and the skies are black. I mean, it's like night. And I'm thinking, no way, we got to get back. So a couple of kids and myself race back. We go to the site. The leaders were starting to put tarps on the roof. We're going up metal ladders with metal hammers, lightning everywhere, putting down nails.
Did they sign a waiver before you left?
Yeah. This is beyond the statute of limitations. But we got it covered, and the next day there was no damage. It was incredible. And the last kind of great experience was we had one where there was rain caused delays. We're standing there on a Friday and we're thinking, there's no way we're going to get this done. By the end of the day, we got it done, and I turned around and saw a rainbow. And it was like we kept our promise and God kept his. On July 3rd, 1991, not long after one of our mission trips, a man named Myers, at a place called Myers, but we weren't drinking Myers, asked me if I would consider being a permanent deacon at the church. I said, that doesn't sound all that nuts, but I don't want this to be a mental exercise where I convince myself this is a calling. I truly want to be called. I told Bob, it'd be nice if the clouds part, a beam of light would shine down on me, and hearing God's voice telling me, hey, go for it, Dick. Nothing dramatic. Oh, I blew that. Oh, no, I'm fine. It was a time where I was feeling lost professionally and struggling to find answers spiritually. Professionally, I was trying to find meaning and purpose in what I was doing. The radio industry was not my passion. It was not my crusade. I felt I had more to offer than a corporate bottom line. I was trying to figure out why I hated it so much. What didn't I see that others saw? I'm in my 40s and I'm thinking, I got 20 more years of this? There is no way I could last. I felt that I would become a shell of myself if I continued down this career path. I started talking to colleagues, men and women, younger and older, and I asked them, why do you do what you do? In summarizing their comments, they said, I don't know anything else, and we're just trying to hang on. And I'm thinking, I just soon let go. Spiritually, I was a co-leader for the high school youth group, going on work trips at West Virginia, pursuing the call as an aspirant to the diaconate. A discernment committee was formed, and Father Mars was my spiritual director. Barb Haljan, Nancy Lovely, and John Campbell were part of it, and I think one of the curates as well. During this time, From when Bob first approached me, it took 5 years before my discernment weekend in 1996, and I was approved as a postulant. There's a long story in that one you don't want to know. But during this time, Mary Jane was pursuing her master's degree in education at National Louis. Obviously, with career security being what it was, she felt she needed to try to look and start a career herself. She graduated in 1997, and at the same time I had applied and was accepted to getting a master's in social work at Loyola University Chicago. MJ said to me, how can you go to deacon school, get a master's, work, and raise a family? We'll never see you. So after being halfway through the 3-year program, in June of 1997, I wrote a letter to Bishop Griswold requesting deferment. And later had to lunch with him. During the next month, Mary Jane was pursuing teaching opportunities. We were trying to sell our house, and in the effort to downsize, neither were happening in the time frame we had hoped. Because of our circumstances, it was clear I had to defer graduate school and go from a part-time to a full-time position as a national account manager in an in-house music research and marketing firm for a major radio broadcasting group. At this point, I had no clue as to God's plan. I was questioning my call and questioning a lot of other things. It was a very low period and confusing time for me. I didn't get it, and quite honestly, I was a little PO'd. In my second year of deacon school, just one of the classes I was taking was in pastoral care. One of the assignments was to present to a group a verbatim of counseling session with a pastoral care recipient. To complete this assignment, Father Myers, my spiritual director, arranged for me to see an elderly parishioner who was in the advanced stages of Alzheimer's at the Mather Pavilion. Again, this was a time when my thinking side of me was struggling for answers and having never met a person with Alzheimer's, let alone one in the advanced stages. I wasn't sure what to expect. To this day, I can't remember a thing that we talked about until she said to me, I can see it in your eyes. I said, what can you see? She said, that you're a loving person. I'm thinking to myself, who's helping who here? This person will never see me, will never remember my name. She will never remember that we met, but I will never forget her. Really, words can't even describe how it affected me. I found the land of meaning and purpose after completing my master's degree in social work at Loyola. I've spent the past 19 years working in a community that is racially diverse, low academic achievement, and limited economic resources. It's a place where I've experienced hope and despair. Hope was working with a student for the last 4 years who was diagnosed with selective mutism, an anxiety disorder which is the consistent failure to speak in social situations where there's an expectation for speaking. They will normally speak at home with family members, but will often refuse to speak at school. In creating a comfortable and safe environment, I initially just wrote him a list of questions. I didn't want to have him to feel that he had to talk to me because he didn't really know me. And it was like 10 questions, family background, things of this, what he liked, what he didn't like, and so forth, because I wanted to make him feel secure. But I also talked to him about selective means select. It's a choice. And I wanted him to gradually start to progress. So I worked with all his teachers. We gave out his 504 plan. I spoke with all his teachers to how to interact with him and what to do, and try to create a way that he feels comfortable and safe, because that's the key. And in his freshman year, when he had to give a presentation, he only gave it to the teacher and not. But since that time, he not only had given a presentation privately, he started to give his portion of the presentation in a group presentation to the entire class, to now where he's giving a presentation to the entire class and using his loud voice. When I asked him how he was able to do that, he said, I wanted to prove to myself I could do it. The student will graduate this year in the top 10% of his class. Despair. The student I knew was a great guy, funny. He was a Hispanic student, good-natured, kind of a chubby kid. But, he had low academic achievement due to poor classroom attendance and a lack of motivation. A year ago, he was shot 4 times, twice in the head and twice in the chest by a rival gang. He survived, but his injuries were extensive. He currently is going through extensive physical therapy and attending an outplacement therapeutic day school. The prognosis is that he will probably never again have full level of functioning. It is my faith that helps me to provide the unconditional support no matter what the outcome. Gosh, well, I kind of screwed that one. Okay. Keep it simple. My faith comes down to 3 basic principles: to love God with all my heart, soul, and mind. I thought it's interesting, the sequential order. To love thy neighbor as thyself and not to judge others. These principles have helped me to maintain a spiritual and emotional balance and perspective. Personally, I'm grateful that I do not have to make that call because I'm a flawed person. And after reading enough collects over the year, that point is made perfectly clear. God loves us unconditionally, no matter who we are. This decade has been a tough one for my family. This picture was of my family taken in July of 2010 when my brother had just recently moved down to Naples as a financial recruiter. This was Tom, to help support my parents in their advanced ages. This picture was taken 2 months before my dad decided to stop dialysis treatment after 18 months. He was placed in the hospice unit on Monday, and after he stopped treatment on Friday. He died within 14 hours. He died from congestive heart failure and chronic renal failure. He was 88 years old. Less than 5 years later, on January 21st, 2015, my mom died at the age of 90 with the exact same circumstances. She had congestive heart failure, she was on renal failure, she was on dialysis. And my brother was there to be my witness for them. 2 years later, a former colleague who lived with my brother at their apartment complex found my brother dead in his apartment. There was no foul play. It happened at a time when my sister was having chemotherapy and radiation treatments for breast cancer, and my brother was just recovering from knee surgery after falling off a step while traveling to Europe. I wasn't able to fly to Florida until a week later, until the funeral home had his death certificate. I made sure he was embalmed before he was cremated so I could be there for him. So somehow let him know I was there and that I was a witness for the family. All 3 members are interned at Holy Comforter. Wow. One constant throughout all our life has been the church. I've been blessed to be a part of this church community. I am grateful for the many friends who faithfully contribute to helping others in need. From Stephen Ministry to Kamali to various guilds and the 30 years of the Men's Saturday morning Bible study. It is those personal interactions that has made life more meaningful. Because I don't believe life should be lived remote. I know you can work remote. I know you can remotely work remote. You can purchase goods and service remote. You can find your soulmate remote. But I think that's not what God has intended. Not completely. I believe God's intent is for us to be in relationship, to enjoy friendships and fellowships, to be there for each other through the woes and wows of life. And to me, this form of fellowship looks like this. This was taken in the 88 or whatever. And 91. This is Sandy Lane. I just, when I think of her and I saw that picture, that's what we were up at the Mangles house up in Lake Beulah, and it was just, we had a great time. So, in closing, and you're probably glad, I want to read a prayer that really struck me through this. Grant, O God, that your holy and life-giving Spirit may so move every human heart that barriers which divide us may crumble, suspicions disappear, and hatreds cease. That our divisions being healed, we may live in justice and peace throughout Jesus Christ our Lord.